Well, a couple of the key items, a couple of the key elements of the deal that Suella Braverman secured apparently back in October last year with the Prime Minister related to immigration, both lawful and unlawful. And I just want to look at the second page of her letter with my next guest regarding what happens tomorrow, depending on this critical decision from our own Supreme Court on the Rwanda ruling. Because the question is, what happens either way, whether the government wins or whether the government loses? I'm delighted to be joined now from central London by Shoaib Khan down the line. Shoaib, thank you so much for joining us on Farage on GBNews. This is a pretty significant letter from Suella Braverman. Some real detail in there about what may happen depending on the ruling from the Supreme Court tomorrow, which we expect, I think, around about 10 o'clock. And essentially, she's sort of saying that it's now, there could have been a win-win, but I think from reading this letter, she's really saying because of what the Prime Minister did or didn't do, actually, it's now the risk of a lose-lose. What are your thoughts on her allegations here?
Yes, thanks. I mean, firstly, what a letter. I mean, I did always wonder, what it would be that would make me agree with Suella Braverman. But then now it turns out her resigning is it. I mean, I was looking at this letter. Most of what she's saying, particularly about the Prime Minister, he keeps promises he can't keep, he's weak, he's indecisive, generally useless. I think, that's what everyone's been saying. And if that's what the Tory front bench thinks, just imagine what the rest of us think about. But yes, I mean, on the points you raised, the legal points themselves, obviously the situation tomorrow, as people have been saying, lawyers have been saying from the start, obviously initially the government turned out to be, very confident about their position, suggesting that they would win, they were sure it's legal. They have been saying for years, particularly when Priti Patel brought the policy in, we are sure it is lawful, we are sure that it complies with all our legal obligations. But now it turns out, looking at this letter, that they weren't really that sure, and even within government, they were quite confident that they may in fact lose. Now, obviously, I mean, from the government's point of view, someone like Suella Braverman, but they would argue as well, we're doing everything lawfully, but the Supreme Court disagrees with us. Which I'm sure, would be offensive and insulting to our Supreme Court, suggesting that it's stopping the government doing what it is lawfully allowed to do. But yes, I mean, looking at this, we understand, of course, that even the government is now perhaps planning or thinking that it might lose. So yes, we just have to wait and see what the Supreme Court actually decides tomorrow.
Because she's essentially saying that if the government loses, then the Prime Minister didn't take the opportunity to have a plan B. Look, I come from the world of business. You always have a plan B because you have to assume plan A won't always work. And if he hasn't got a plan B, then she's saying you've basically wasted a year, nothing will be able to happen, and that essentially that's betraying the pledges to stop the boats to the British people. Do you agree with her assessment on that?
Well, I mean, I think we have to take her word for it from what, about what was happening between her and the Prime Minister. But even if what she is saying is talking about the past 1 year. The Rwanda scheme wasn't developed or introduced 1 year ago. What's been happening in the past year is just it's been going through the courts. But the point is, even then, you say, you talk about the business world, but generally as a lawyer, you don't really start planning developing a plan B once things have got to court. The point is, why don't you have a plan B, plan C before you actually announce plan A? That's when, whether that was Priti Patel. And in fact, if I'm not wrong, maybe it was Suella Braverman who was Attorney General at that time. Perhaps she was. And when this was announced, wasn't that her role at the time to say, look, legally, this is not a feasible plan. We need to look at other options. Well, of course she didn't. Priti Patel wanted to, go out with a bang. She made that announcement. And then, and then Suella Braverman obviously just took it and ran with it. But even the past few months, since the High Court found firstly that it was lawful, the Court of Appeal decided it wasn't. Now for the past few months, it's been in the Supreme Court. Now it's far too late to be thinking, what we're doing, is this plan legal or not? Now it's in the court's hands. So I don't really quite agree with that assessment of just putting the blame on Rishi Sunak. The point is the Home Secretary's plan. She should have made sure it was lawful.
But she's accusing him of essentially preventing that. But even if the government wins tomorrow, Shoaib, she's basically saying, and this will be a real shock, I think, to millions of people up and down the country, people will not be swiftly removed as originally proposed. The average claimant will still be entitled to months of process, challenge and appeal. So anybody expecting a plane to take off within a few days is going to be sorely disappointed. And then she goes on to say something very technical regarding what's called the Rule 39 indications, and that the Prime Minister says they are binding in international law. They come from the ECHR, from the European Court of Human Rights. So essentially, that we're still going to be thwarted by Strasbourg. Is that your understanding of the rules, even if the government wins?
Obviously, there is a chance. I mean, the further legal course of action, if the appellants, i.e. the asylum seekers, lose tomorrow, and the policy is found to be lawful, then of course there is further recourse to the European Court of Human Rights. And in fact, I would disagree with her assessment, in fact, her legal analysis, as I think most lawyers do, in terms of Rule 39. The court itself, the practice direction, it's on the court's website, it very, very clearly says that Rule 39 interim measures are binding on member states. So I'm not sure, she seems to be suggesting we advise the Prime Minister that they're not binding. And he refused to follow that. So I think he was probably correct to do so. If they are binding, obviously the points she raises generally about leaving the ECHR and so on. Do we want to be a member of that? I mean, I think it would be appalling or tragedy if we did leave, obviously. But that's a separate thing. But the point is, while we are a member of that court, we have to abide by its rulings. And if a judge makes a decision, then it is binding on us.
I think, Shoaib, millions of people will be astonished that if our own Supreme Court backs the government, backs the policy, backs the legislation, that we're still subject to Strasbourg. Fascinating insight from you, Shoaib Khan. Thank you so much for joining us here on Farage on GB News.